Money is a fundamental driver of human success. It's probably up there with fire and sliced bread in terms of importance. However, for most of us, our education on the subject is almost non-existent. So let's fix that. I'm Mitch, this is Pablo, welcome to Mitch Tape. Now before money, we had what's known as a barter economy. So let's say you're a fisherman and you need a new animal fur for warmth. You go to the skinner, tell him you need one fur, and negotiate a number of fish in payment. This is bartering, exchanging goods and services without the use of money. Now, you can probably immediately see the problem here. You not only had to find someone who had too much of the good you needed, but you had to hope they needed whatever good you were offering in exchange. And on top of that, what if the fur is worth a boatload of fish? What's the fur seller going to do with a pile of fish that he can't eat before it starts to rot? And that's assuming that you can stockpile that many fish in the first place. Barter suffers not only from this requiring a coincidence of needs between two parties, but it also runs into problems when goods differ in size, location, or they're time sensitive like the fish. And to get around this, over time, many societies naturally started using one specific good as a means of payment, known as a medium of exchange. The potential for trade and its efficiency grew rapidly when half of every transaction was a good which everybody was happy to receive in payment. Think about it from the fisherman's point of view. He can now sell his fish to anyone with money, regardless of whether he needed or liked what they were producing. Likewise, he can now use that money to buy goods from anyone, regardless of whether they needed or liked his fish. But let's take this a step further. Every fish which our fisherman catches costs him time and energy. And before money, if he had extra fish which he couldn't sell and it rots, it represents his time and energy going to waste. But money offers the potential to convert that otherwise wasted energy into something that can be spent later. So really, money is a good which acts as an efficient store of energy. It's proof that someone or something somewhere has done the work which helps give it value. And the preservation of food aided our advancement by saving calorific energy for consumption later. And money takes this a step further by allowing us to store the surplus energy of all labour. So money is just stored energy. The traditional idea of historical money is precious metals like silver and gold. And this is often true, but many other goods have acted as money over the years, from cigarettes in prisons to mobile minutes in certain parts of Africa. So for example, on the island of Yap in the Pacific, locals would travel to nearby islands and quarry rye stones, which they'd bring back and use as money. The value came from their scarcity and the difficulty involved in retrieving them. And they could weigh up to 4 tons, and there were instances of boats sinking with them on board and they still acted as currency. Similarly, when Europeans came to the Americas, they adopted wampum or clam shell beads as money to trade with the natives. Different coloured shells were worth different amounts and they were given a fixed price into coin currency. They were very labour intensive to produce with only stone tools available, which helped give them value. Then you've got goods like glass trade beads, which were used as money in Africa until as late as the 20th century. Again, these were very time-consuming and just generally difficult to produce in the local economy, which helped them maintain their value. But it's undeniable that gold has emerged as the most reliable or sound money. So by studying gold, we can start to build a picture of what traits make a dependable money. Most importantly, gold is relatively scarce and costly to mine, making it very difficult to increase its supply, which helps it maintain its value. It's highly durable, it's almost indestructible, so you can confidently keep it without worrying about fires or floods or something else that might destroy something else. It's portable, small amounts are relatively easy to transport and can still be worth a significant amount. It's fungible, which means in general there's no difference from one piece of gold to the next. This makes trade more efficient. On top of that, it's difficult to forge, which again makes it more difficult to increase the supply. Gold's also self-sovereign in that it can't be manipulated by a government or any other entity, and it doesn't depend on them for its value. This last point is worth exploring. The introduction of the first coins in around 700 BC by Lydian kings is probably the first example of an authority starting to take control of the money supply. The coins were made with standard weights and consistent branding, which gave them a legitimacy which made trade smoother due to higher levels of trust. However, giving anyone control of the money supply means there will always be the temptation for them to manipulate that money for their own benefit. Unfortunately, this is a pattern we consistently see throughout history. Several times, the Roman Emperor Nero collected coins, melted them down, and reissued them at the same value but with less precious metal content. This undermined trust in the economy and it was one of the major reasons for the fall of the Roman Empire. Similarly, there were multiple periods of debasement by the French crown to finance the 100 Years' War. In Britain alone, the pound sterling used to contain a troy pound of sterling. Now it contains none. Any activity like this benefits the issuer, which is normally the government, at the cost of the population. They create more money, devaluing existing money in the process, but can spend the new money before the effects, i.e. higher prices, have hit the economy. This is also exactly what happened with rhinestones, wampum shells, and the African trade beads, and countless other monies over the years. More technologically advanced nations realised they could produce them for cheaper than the locals. If someone can spend less work than you to create the good you use as money, they can steal your wealth and disrupt your economy. Let's use an example. I mentioned cigarettes being a prison currency earlier. Imagine the effect of one prisoner secretly receiving a package of cigarettes which doubles the current prison supply. This would make each cigarette worth less because there's more cigarettes chasing the same amount of other goods in the prison. However, the prisoner is able to start buying goods before other prisoners realise that the money supply is increased. He can enrich himself by spending all of his cigarettes, buying goods for cheaper than they should be, and either increase his consumption or sell them for a profit at a later date. By the 20th century, much of the developed world was on a gold standard, a monetary system where the local paper currency is backed by gold. Specifically, gold was convertible to dollars at a fixed rate, and other currencies were pegged to the dollar. This gave all the advantages of using gold as money, but with the benefit of the increased portability and divisibility of paper money. The idea of paper notes representing gold actually started organically too. Goldsmiths kept their stock in very secure vaults and realised there was demand from other gold owners to store their gold too. So depositors were given a paper receipt which represented the gold they owned, and this paper quickly became a medium of transaction itself. The gold rarely left the vaults. However, over the course of the 20th century, many countries left the gold standard during war and times of economic hardship, printing money which exceeded their gold reserves. This included the US, whose dollars had become the world reserve currency by the end of World War II. They also happened to be storing a lot of gold for other countries. The rest of the world became increasingly worried because the dollars they held were no longer completely backed by gold. By 1966, non-US banks held $14 billion, with only $3.2 billion of gold held in the US against this. France was so worried that they sent a battleship to New York to buy gold for dollars, and other countries like Great Britain followed suit. In 1971, Nixon solved the US's problem by temporarily severing the dollar peg to gold entirely, causing massive upheaval in the currency markets as they were forced to adjust. This brings us to the present, where we use a fiat monetary system. Fiat is Latin for decree, order, or authorization. So our money isn't backed by gold anymore, and it has value only because the government decrees it so. But how does this work exactly? Well, control of fiat money falls under the remit of central banks like the Bank of England or the US Federal Reserve. They have a monopoly on the creation of money. Their aims are typically some mix of financial stability, low inflation, low employment, and they achieve this by controlling the supply of money. However, as we now know, when a person or entity can increase the money supply, they stand to directly gain from this, and the temptation has always been too high. Rather than raise money via taxation or borrowing, the government simply creates more money, which it gets to spend before the consequences of a higher money supply have been digested by the economy, exactly like the cigarettes in the prison example. The resulting inflation is essentially a stealth tax, which we all pay. A £20 note buys you less goods next year than it does today, and the government pockets the difference, without the need to visibly raise taxes or borrow more money. They're effectively stealing your time. This is a chart of the US money supply over the last 15 years, in which time it's basically tripled, with a 25% increase in the last year alone. Over the same period, the government's measure of inflation, CPI, has remained fairly stable around 2.5%, implying roughly a 50% rise in the level of prices overall. Now, it's not difficult to see the conflict of interest here. On the one hand, you have a government which directly benefits from an increase in the money supply at the cost of its population. And on the other hand, you have the same government deciding how to calculate the figures which suggest that inflation is low and stable. Even the original definition of inflation has been altered. It was the act of increasing the money supply without a corresponding increase in the output of goods and services. Rising prices was just the result of that. But these days, the government is able to pick and choose exactly what prices it tracks in order to measure inflation, which opens it up to easy manipulation. CPI doesn't track inflation in financial assets like property or stocks, where over the last decade returns have been much more correlated to the growth in the money supply. This is where all that money is flowing. Poorer members of society who have little exposure to financial assets are being left behind. Not only are asset prices rapidly increasing in value, but the value of cash savings is debasing, and the cost of everyday necessities is going up. If it seems far-fetched to you that the government might be stealing from you, consider that in 1933, the government forced people to sell their gold at just over $20 an ounce, before setting the new price at $35. Don't think they're any different to Nero. This is Mitch Tate. Comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.